The mob's roar fills the square, their fingers pointing, jeering, as Elara kneels before them, bound, humiliated. The executioner's axe rises, its cold steel gleaming in the early morning sun. The crowd's breath catches this is it. The moment of her destruction. The blade falls, but it never meets its mark. A hand shoots out from the shadows, impossibly fast, catching the axe mid-swing. The crowd gasps. The dark Duke, Dorian Blackwood, stands between her and certain shame, his grip unyielding, his blood staining the air as it seeps from his hand. The square falls silent. "Enough," he speaks, his voice as cold as the blade in his hand. His gaze turns to her, piercing, intense. A strange recognition flickers in his eyes. But why has he come? What does he want with her now? Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this historic romantic tale, I'd be so grateful for a like or a subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories of love, longing, and history. And if you're up for it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and it always brings a smile to my face. Chapter 1. The Square of Judgment. Dawn broke over the town square like a wound splitting open, all crimson and gold bleeding across the cobblestones. Elara Whitmore stumbled as rough hands shoved her forward, her bound wrists screaming in protest. The rope had rubbed her skin raw during the long night in the magistrate's cell, but she refused to cry out. She would give them nothing, not her tears, not her pleas, and certainly not her confession to a crime she had never committed. "Move faster, harlot," a woman's voice cut through the morning air, sharp as broken glass. Lysandra Greaves swept ahead of the mob like a dark angel of judgment, her emerald silk dress pristine despite the early hour. Her blonde hair was arranged in perfect ringlets, her posture that of a queen leading her subjects to war. But her eyes, those pale blue eyes, burned with something far uglier than righteousness. "Homewrecker," someone shouted from the crowd. "Seductress," another voice joined in. She used witchcraft to steal him. The accusations rained down like stones, each one designed to bruise, if not break. Elara kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, her silver-grey eyes reflecting nothing but defiance. Her dress, one she had sewn herself from modest cotton, hung in tatters, torn deliberately by her captors to complete the picture of moral corruption they were painting. Her dark hair, usually pinned neatly for work, fell in tangled waves around her shoulders. They reached the center of the square, where a wooden platform had been erected overnight. The sight of it made Elara's stomach twist. She had walked through this square 1,000 times, had sold her dresses to merchants whose wives now screamed for her humiliation. The baker who had always complimented her needlework now spat at her feet. The world had turned inside out in the span of a single day. "Citizens of Thornwick," Lysandra's voice rang out, silencing the mob. She ascended the platform with practiced grace, every inch the wronged woman seeking justice. "We gather here to witness the punishment of Elara Whitmore, who stands accused of seduction, adultery, and the destruction of sacred betrothals." The crowd roared its approval. Elara's mind drifted back 3 weeks, to the moment her life had shattered. Lord Geoffrey Thorne had entered her modest seamstress shop on Market Street, requesting a dress for his mother's birthday. He was a soft-spoken man with kind eyes, the only son of a wealthy merchant family. Elara had accepted the commission gratefully. The Thornes' patronage would mean steady work for months. But Geoffrey had returned, again and again, not to discuss the dress, but to talk, to watch her work, to confess, eventually, that he found her unlike any woman he had ever known. "I cannot marry Lysandra," he had said that final afternoon, his voice desperate. "She is cold, calculating. But you have warmth, creativity, genuine kindness. I love you, Elara. Run away with me." Elara had refused as gently as she could. "My lord, you honor me, but I cannot accept. You are betrothed. I am a seamstress. Our worlds are not meant to intersect this way." He had left heartbroken. She had thought that was the end of it. How naive she had been. "This woman," Lysandra continued, her voice dripping with manufactured grief, "used her beauty and cunning to bewitch my betrothed. She lured Lord Geoffrey to her establishment under the pretense of honest work, then seduced him, breaking our engagement and destroying my family's honor. Lies. Every word was poison, wrapped in silk. But the crowd believed. They wanted to believe. A beautiful seamstress tempting a wealthy lord made for a satisfying story, one that confirmed their suspicions about women who worked alone, who lived without husbands, who dared to be independent. "The punishment for such crimes," Lysandra announced, "is public marking. Let all who see her know what she is." A figure emerged from the crowd, and Ilara's breath caught. Willem, the town's executioner, climbed the platform with heavy steps. He was a massive man with a scarred face, but his hands trembled as he lifted his axe. The blade caught the morning light, winking like a cruel eye. This was not an execution, not in the traditional sense. They would not take her head. Instead, they would take her hair, cutting it short in front of the entire town. The mark of an adulteress, the brand of a homewrecker. She would be forced to live with the shame, unable to hide what she had supposedly done. Willem's eyes met hers for just a moment, and she saw the apology there. He was a good man, forced to do terrible things by those with power and gold. "She destroys families," Lysandra shrieked, whipping the crowd into fresh frenzy. "She corrupts good men. She must be marked so all will know her true nature." The mob pressed closer, their faces twisted with righteous fury. Ilara was forced to her knees, her bound hands useless at her sides. Two men held her shoulders, preventing any chance of escape. Willem raised the axe high. His face was ashen, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool morning air. Time seemed to slow. Ilara could hear her own heartbeat, loud as a drum. She could smell the morning bread from the baker's shop, incongruously pleasant. She could feel the rough wood of the platform beneath her knees, digging into her skin through her torn dress. She closed her silver-grey eyes and thought of her mother. Ilara remembered so little, just fragments really. A gentle voice singing lullabies, soft hands braiding her hair, and eyes, silver-grey like her own, filled with a sadness Ilara had been too young to understand. "Is this how you died, mother?" she wondered. Condemned by lies, destroyed by those with power. The axe began its descent. Then everything changed. A shadow cut through the crowd like a blade through water, moving with such speed and purpose that people scattered without thinking. A figure emerged from the sea of bodies, tall, imposing, dressed entirely in black as though he wore the night itself. Dorian Blackwood, the Dark Duke, stepped onto the platform. Ilara's eyes flew open at the collective gasp from the crowd. She had never seen him before, but she knew him instantly. Everyone in Thornwick knew of Duke Blackwood, though few had ever glimpsed him. He was legend made flesh, a decorated war hero who had returned from battle changed, hardened, transformed into something both more and less than human. He lived in isolation at Blackwood Manor, emerging rarely, always alone, always cold. He was beautiful in the way winter was beautiful, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. His face could have been carved from marble, pale and perfect, with eyes so dark they seemed black. Those eyes swept across the crowd with casual menace, and grown men took involuntary steps backward. Then his bare hand shot out with impossible speed, catching Willem's descending axe mid-swing. The blade bit into his palm. Blood welled up, bright crimson against his pale skin, dripping onto the cobblestones with soft, rhythmic sounds. But Dorian Blackwood did not flinch. He held the axe motionless as though it weighed nothing, as though pain was merely a concept that did not apply to him. Enough. The single word was spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but it carried such weight, such absolute authority, that the entire square fell into stunned silence. Even the morning birds seemed to stop singing. Willem released the axe handle and stumbled backward, his face flooding with relief. The weapon clattered to the platform as Dorian let it fall, his blood now marking the wood. The Duke's gaze swept across the crowd once more, then locked onto Ilara's face. Their eyes met silver-grey and midnight black, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition? Surprise? Ilara could not name it, but she felt it like a physical force, stealing what remained of her breath. The moment passed, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "This woman is under my protection now." Dorian's voice remained quiet but carried to every corner of the square. "Anyone who challenges this answers to me." Lysandra pushed forward, her composure cracking. "Your Grace, this is a matter of justice. She is under my protection," Dorian repeated, turning his dark gaze on Lysandra. "Do you wish to challenge me, Miss Greaves?" Lysandra's mouth opened, then closed. Her face flushed with fury, but she could not speak. No one challenged the Dark Duke, not if they valued their position, their wealth, or their safety. Dorian descended to where Ilara knelt, held by her captors. He made a slight gesture, and the men released her immediately, scrambling away as though burned. Then he reached down with his bleeding hand and grasped the ropes, binding her wrists. The rough fibers turned crimson as he worked, but within moments, Elara's hands were free. She brought them forward, staring at the blood, his blood, now marking her skin. "Stand," he commanded, not unkindly. Elara tried. Her legs had gone numb from kneeling, from fear, from the shock of survival. She managed to rise halfway before her knees buckled. Dorian caught her with ease, one arm sweeping beneath her legs, the other supporting her back. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Through the torn fabric of her dress, she could feel the solid strength of him, could smell cedar and leather and something darker, more complex. "Why?" the word escaped her lips as a whisper, barely audible. The Duke looked down at her, and for just a moment, his marble facade cracked. Something human flickered in those dark eyes, something almost like pain, or perhaps memory. "Because you have your mother's eyes." The world tilted. Elara's vision blurred at the edges, darkness creeping in like a tide. Her last coherent thought before consciousness fled was a question that would haunt her waking. How did he know? My mother. She felt herself being carried, heard the murmur of the crowd parting before them, sensed the morning sun warm on her face. Then there was only darkness, and in that darkness, a memory that was not quite a memory, a woman's voice, singing a lullaby in a language Elara did not know, and the feeling of absolute safety she had not known since childhood. Behind them, the town square remained frozen in shocked silence. Willem stood on the platform, staring at his empty hands. Lysandra's face was white with rage and something else, fear, perhaps, or the first cold touch of understanding that she had made a grave mistake. And the axe lay on the blood-stained wood, abandoned, its task forever unfinished. Chapter 2. The Duke's Fortress. Elara woke to softness. After a night on the cold stone floor of the magistrate's cell and the rough wood of the platform, the sensation was so foreign it took her several moments to orient herself. Silk sheets whispered against her skin. A velvet canopy hung above her, deep burgundy embroidered with silver thread. The stitching was exquisite, she noted, automatically, even through her confusion. Pale morning light filtered through heavy curtains, casting the room in a golden haze. This was not her modest room above the seamstress shop. This was not anywhere she had ever been. Panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. She sat up too quickly, and pain lanced through her wrists, where the ropes had bitten deep. Her head swam, memories flooding back in a disorienting rush. The square, the axe, the blood, and him, the dark Duke, catching the blade with his bare hand, his dark eyes boring into hers. "Because you have your mother's eyes. Easy now, child. You're safe." Elara's gaze snapped to the source of the voice. An older woman sat in a chair beside the bed, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had kind eyes, warm brown, and crinkled at the corners from years of smiling. Her grey hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple but well-made dress of charcoal wool, the uniform of a head servant in a wealthy household. "Who are you?" Elara's voice came out rough, her throat dry. "Mrs. Beatrice Thornwood, housekeeper of Blackwood Manor, and you, my dear, are in the guest chambers." The woman rose with practiced grace, pouring water from a crystal pitcher into a glass. "Drink slowly. You've had quite an ordeal." Elara accepted the glass with trembling hands, noticing for the first time that someone had cleaned and bandaged her wrists. The water was cool and sweet, and she had to resist the urge to gulp it down. "Why would the Duke save me?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "What does he want?" Beatrice's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in those kind eyes, sympathy, perhaps, or understanding. "His Grace has his reasons, child, reasons that are his to share, not mine." "That's not an answer." "No," Beatrice agreed with a small smile, "but it's the only one I can give you right now. Come, let me help you bathe and dress properly. You'll feel better once you're clean." The bathing room was attached to the chambers, another luxury Elara had never experienced. The copper tub was already filled with steaming water, and someone had laid out fresh clothing, a simple dress of deep blue wool, far finer than anything Elara had owned, but modest in style. Her seamstress's eye noted the quality immediately. The fabric was expensive but not ostentatious, the cut flattering but not frivolous. As Beatrice helped her into the tub, Elara's hands were still too unsteady to manage alone. The older woman began to speak in a careful, measured tone. "I served another great house before this one, many years ago." She worked lavender-scented soap through Elara's tangled hair with gentle hands. The Ashford family. Perhaps you've heard of them? Ilara's breath caught. Ashford. That's what he said, that my mother's name was Isolde Ashford. Beatrice's hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed their work. Your mother, Isolde, was the kindest lady I ever knew. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, valued, even servants like me. Her voice softened with memory. When I saw your eyes yesterday, those distinctive silver-grey eyes, I knew who you were immediately. You knew my mother? Ilara twisted in the tub to look at Beatrice, water sloshing over the sides. Please, tell me about her. I remember almost nothing, but Beatrice's expression had shuttered, becoming professionally pleasant once more. The Duke will explain the rest. It's not my place to speak of such matters, she urged Ilara back around. Now hold still while I rinse your hair. Frustration burned in Ilara's chest, but she sensed that pushing would yield nothing. Beatrice Thornwood was loyal to her employer first, kind stranger second. Once bathed and dressed, Ilara found herself alone in the guest chambers. Beatrice had left her with instructions to rest, but rest was impossible. Her mind churned with questions, each one more troubling than the last. She moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Blackwood Manor stretched before her in the morning light, a sprawling Gothic estate of grey stone and sharp angles. Gardens that had once been manicured now grew somewhat wild, though not entirely neglected. Everything spoke of past grandeur maintained but not celebrated, wealth spent on necessity rather than display. The door was unlocked. She tested it, almost without thinking, surprised when it opened freely. So, she was not a prisoner, then. Not exactly. Ilara stepped into the corridor, her borrowed shoes silent on thick carpet. The hallway was lined with portraits, generations of Blackwood ancestors staring down with stern expressions. She walked slowly, studying each face, looking for some hint of the man who had saved her in those painted features. There at the end of the hall, a more recent portrait. A younger Dorian Blackwood, perhaps 10 years past, in military dress. He looked different, then still serious, but there was life in his eyes, a light that the man she had met in the square no longer possessed. What had happened to extinguish it? Miss? Ilara spun to find a young maid watching her nervously from a doorway. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, with auburn hair and freckles scattered across her nose. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you, Ilara said quickly. I was just... It's all right, miss. The maid glanced down the corridor, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. I'm Jenny. I wanted to warn you there was a woman here this morning. Beautiful, blonde, wearing green silk. She was asking about you. Lysandra. Ilara's stomach clenched. What did she want? Jenny's eyes darted nervously. She offered me money for information about you, about whether you were really here, what condition you were in, what the Duke said. The girl straightened her shoulders. I told her nothing, miss. Mrs. Thornwood would dismiss me instantly. And besides, what she tried to do to you in the square. She shook her head. That wasn't justice. That was cruelty. Something warm unfurled in Ilara's chest. Thank you, Jenny. That was brave of you. The maid flushed with pleasure but glanced around again anxiously. Just be careful, miss. She's not done with you. I could see it in her eyes. She was angry that His Grace interfered. Very angry. After Jenny hurried away, Ilara continued her exploration with a new weight of understanding. Escaping the square had been just the beginning. Lysandra Greaves had power, wealth, and connections. One man's protection, even a duke's, might not be enough. She found herself in what was clearly the main hall, a cavernous space with a grand staircase and more portraits. Here, the servants moved with quiet efficiency, and Ilara noticed something curious. They didn't whisper and scatter like frightened mice when they saw her. Instead, they nodded respectfully, their expressions curious but not hostile. Whatever reputation the Dark Duke had, his household served him with something that looked more like respect than fear. Miss Whitmore. The voice came from above. Ilara looked up to find a butler, elderly, distinguished, with impeccable posture, descending the stairs. His Grace requests your presence in his study, if you would follow me. It was not truly a request, Ilara understood, but neither was it a command. She nodded and followed the butler through a maze of corridors, noting details with her trained eye. The fabrics here were expensive velvet curtains, silk cushions, but many showed signs of age, a curtain with slightly faded edges, a chair with expertly mended upholstery. Dorian Blackwood had wealth, but he spent it carefully, maintained rather than replaced, preserved rather than paraded. The study door was heavy oak, carved with intricate patterns. The butler knocked once, received a muffled response, and opened it, gesturing for Alara to enter. The room took her breath away. 3 walls were lined, floor to ceiling, with books, their leather spines creating a tapestry of colors and textures. Military maps covered the 4th wall and spread across a massive desk of dark wood. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. And there, behind the desk, sat the Dark Duke. He looked up as she entered, and Alara was struck again by the austere beauty of him, all sharp edges and controlled power. His injured hand was neatly bandaged, but he held a pen in it without apparent difficulty, making notations on a document. "Miss Whitmore, please, sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Alara sat, acutely aware of his gaze on her. She found herself unconsciously tracing the pattern in the chair's upholstery, a complex damask weave that spoke of quality craftsmanship. "You worked with fabric." It was a statement, not a question. Alara's hand stilled. She met his dark eyes directly. "I was a seamstress. A good one." Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. I suspect my shop is gone by now. Lysandra would have seen to that." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Dorian set down his pen with deliberate care. "Lysandra Greaves will not rest until you're destroyed. You understand that, I hope. This morning she came here, attempting to gather information." "I know. Your maid, Jenny, told me." "Good. Jenny has sense." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Which brings us to the pertinent question. Why do you suppose I intervened?" Alara lifted her chin. "You tell me, Your Grace. Why do you care what happens to a seamstress falsely accused?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "Because your mother saved my life once. I owe her a debt." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. "I don't understand," Alara whispered. "You will." Dorian stood, moving to the window. With his back to her, he continued. "I'm offering you protection. You'll remain here at Blackwood Manor until I determine your situation. Your safety, your position." "My situation?" Anger sparked in Alara's chest. "I'm not trading one prison for another, Your Grace. If I'm to stay, I want to understand why." He turned back to her, and for the first time, a slight smile curved his lips, cold, calculating, but oddly amused. "The alternative is returning to that square, to Lysandra's mercy, such as it is. Choose." Alara's hands clenched in her lap. He was right, and they both knew it. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to protect her, but agreeing felt like surrendering the last shred of control over her own life. "Tell me one thing," she said finally. "Tell me about my mother." Dorian returned to his desk, settling back into his chair. His expression shifted, becoming something almost gentle. "What do you know of her?" "Nothing." Alara's voice broke slightly despite her efforts to control it. "She died when I was 3. I have one memory, her singing, and her eyes like mine." "Your mother's name was Isolde Ashford." Dorian opened a drawer in his desk, withdrawing something small. "That name means something, Miss Whitmore. Something dangerous enough that people killed to bury it." He slid the object across the desk, a miniature portrait in a silver frame. Alara's hand trembled as she picked it up. The woman in the painting stared back at her with familiar silver-grey eyes set in a face that could have been Alara's own, just older, more refined, the same dark hair, the same delicate bone structure. But there was something else, a quiet strength in the painted gaze, a nobility of bearing that spoke of breeding and education. Alara couldn't finish the sentence. "Your mother, Lady Isolde Ashford, daughter of one of the most powerful families in the kingdom." Dorian's voice was soft but inexorable. "Welcome home, Lady Alara Ashford." The portrait slipped from Alara's fingers, clattering onto the desk. The world tilted sideways, everything she thought she knew about herself fragmenting like glass. "No," she whispered, "that's impossible. I'm a seamstress. My mother was in hiding," Dorian finished, "protecting you, and herself, from the same forces that tried to destroy you yesterday." Alara looked up at him, and in his dark eyes she saw truth, terrifying, incomprehensible truth. Her life, as she had known it, was a lie, and the real story, whatever it was, had just begun. Chapter 3. Secrets in the Shadows. The days at Blackwood Manor fell into a rhythm that was both foreign and oddly comforting. Alara woke each morning in silk sheets, dressed in borrowed gowns that fit surprisingly well, and wandered halls that grew less intimidating with each passing hour. She was not a prisoner, the doors were unlocked, the grounds open to her, but she felt watched nonetheless. Not with hostility, but with a careful attention that suggested protection rather than confinement. On the third day, restlessness drove her to Beatrice's sitting room, where the housekeeper was sorting through a basket of mending. "May I help?" Alara asked from the doorway. Beatrice looked up, surprise flickering across her weathered face. "My dear, you're a guest. You needn't. Please." Alara stepped into the room, her fingers already itching for the familiar comfort of needle and thread. "I can't sit idle. It's not in my nature." Understanding softened Beatrice's expression. "I know the feeling well." She gestured to the basket. "A footman tore his livery on a rosebush. I've been putting it off. The fabric is difficult to work with." Alara settled into the chair beside her, examining the garment with a practiced eye. The tier was substantial, the wool expensive and tightly woven, but her hands knew what to do, had known since before memory. Within minutes, she was lost in the familiar meditation of repair, her needle flashing in and out with precise, nearly invisible stitches. When she finished, Beatrice held the livery up to the light, searching for the mend. "Extraordinary," she breathed. "I can barely see where it was torn." Word spread through the household with the speed of wildfire. By evening, 3 more servants had appeared at Beatrice's door with items needing repair: a torn apron, a frayed curtain tie, a tablecloth with a stubborn stain that needed careful embroidery to conceal. Alara welcomed each task, and with each completed repair, the servant's initial wariness transformed into something warmer. "What's your name?" she asked the footman when he came to collect his mended livery. He blinked, clearly unused to such attention from those above his station. "Thomas." "Miss. The rose bushes near the east garden are particularly vicious, Thomas. Perhaps approach them from the left side, the thorns angle differently there." A slow smile spread across his face. "Thank you, miss. I'll remember that." What Alara didn't know was that Dorian watched these interactions from doorways and shadowed corners, observing with an intensity he couldn't quite name. He saw her ask the scullery maid about her ailing mother, saw her remember the names of servants most nobles would never acknowledge. He watched, and something long dormant stirred in his chest, something uncomfortable and achingly familiar. On the 5th evening, Alara found Jenny crying in an alcove near the servants' quarters. The girl's face was blotchy, her eyes red-rimmed with grief. "Jenny," Alara knelt beside her without hesitation. "What's wrong?" "My mother," Jenny choked out. "She's taken ill with fever. The physician says," her voice broke, "he says she may not recover." Alara had no magic cure, no wealth to offer better doctors, but she had hands that knew how to comfort. So she gathered the trembling girl close and began to braid her hair with gentle, methodical movements, the same way she imagined her own mother might have done in those lost years before memory began. "Tell me about her," Alara said softly. "Tell me what makes her special." Jenny talked through her tears stories of a mother who sang while cooking, who made everything feel safe, who sacrificed so her daughter could work in a great house rather than the factories. And Alara listened, braiding and smoothing, offering the simple gift of presence. From the shadows of the corridor, Dorian stood frozen. The scene before him had cracked something open inside his chest. Alara's hands in Jenny's hair, her quiet murmur of comfort, it was achingly familiar. His sister Amelia had braided his hair just so when he was small, before fever had taken her, before the world had taught him that kindness was a weakness to be exploited. He turned away before either woman could see him, but the image followed him back to his study, where he poured brandy with unsteady hands. The next morning, Dorian surprised them all by granting Alara unrestricted access to his library. "You strike me as someone who needs answers," he said simply, handing her the key to the locked section. "Perhaps you'll find some there." Alara spent hours among the books, her fingers trailing across leather spines, pulling down volumes on noble lineages and political history. The Ashford name appeared repeatedly, a family of hereditary advisors to the crown, holders of the Duchy of Thornshire, renowned for their wisdom and loyalty, stretching back generations. Then, 20 years ago, the record simply, F.T. stopped. Official documents claimed the Ashfords had fled the country under suspicion of treason, but tucked between the pages of a geography text, Alara found something else, a letter, yellow with age, written in a shaking hand. "They came at night. We barely escaped with our lives. Edmund Thorne has orchestrated this. I know it was him. The evidence we gathered against the conspiracy died with everyone in that house. Everyone but Isolde, who ran with the child. Heaven protect them both. Ilara's hands shook as she read. The letter was unsigned, undated, but the implications were clear. The Ashfords hadn't fled. They'd been slaughtered. Shortly after their disappearance, she discovered in a dusty ledger the Thornshire lands had been granted to Lord Edmund Thorne, Geoffrey's father, Lysandra's would-be father-in-law. The pieces assembled themselves with terrible clarity. If Ilara was truly an Ashford heir, her very existence threatened the Thorne family's claim to stolen wealth and power. Lysandra's vendetta wasn't just about jealousy over Geoffrey's infatuation. It was about eliminating a threat to her family's entire foundation. But how had Lysandra discovered the truth? And more importantly, who else knew? That afternoon, Ilara stood at her chamber window, watching clouds gather over the distant hills. Movement caught her eye, a figure at the tree line, partially obscured by the forest's shadows. An elderly woman in a hooded cloak, standing perfectly still, watching the manor with an intensity Ilara could feel, even at this distance. Their eyes met across the expanse of lawn. The woman's face was hidden, but something in her posture suggested longing, grief, and recognition. Then she was gone, melting back into the trees like smoke. Ilara found Beatrice in the kitchen, supervising the evening meal preparations. There was a woman watching the manor, elderly, in a dark cloak. "Do you know who?" Beatrice's face went white as fresh linen. "Where?" "The tree line, east side. She was just standing there, watching. Do you know her?" "Stay away from the windows today, child." Beatrice gripped Ilara's arm with surprising strength. "Please, don't go outside. Don't stand where you can be seen." Beatrice, who was she? But the housekeeper's lips pressed into a thin line, and no amount of pressing could make her speak further. That night, sleep eluded Ilara. Near midnight, she gave up and made her way to the library, seeking comfort among the books. She wasn't prepared to find Dorian already there. He sat in a leather chair, a glass of brandy in one hand, staring at a collection of military commendations mounted on the wall. He didn't turn when she entered, but his voice emerged from the darkness. "Can't sleep either." "Too many questions," Ilara admitted, settling into a chair across from him. "Too few answers. The burden of an active mind." He took a slow sip of brandy. "I saved you for strategic reasons initially. I won't lie about that." The bluntness surprised her. "Strategic? The Ashford claim could destabilize the Thornes, which benefits me." His voice was flat, emotionless, the Dark Duke fully present. "Edmund Thorne destroyed my life 10 years ago. I've waited a decade for an opportunity to return the favor." Ilara should have felt used, manipulated. Instead, she felt the weight of shared pain. What did he do? In the darkness, Dorian's story emerged like blood from a wound. 10 years ago, he'd been different. A decorated military commander engaged to a woman named Catherine, best friends with Lord Edmund Thorne. He'd trusted Edmund with sensitive military information, only to discover that Edmund had sold those secrets to the enemy and framed Dorian for the treason. Catherine believed the lies. Dorian's voice roughened. "She broke our engagement publicly and married Edmund 3 months later. I was court-martialed, barely escaped execution through lack of evidence. But the scandal destroyed me socially." He gestured vaguely at the manor around them. "So I retreated here, built walls, learned that trusting anyone was a fool's errand." "What happened to Catherine?" "Died in childbirth 5 years ago. Edmund's guilt drove him to drink. He's a shadow now, barely functional. His son Geoffrey grew up in that poisoned household, seeking escape in fantasies of innocent seamstresses." A bitter laugh. "The sins of the fathers, as they say. But today," Dorian continued, his voice dropping to something raw and honest, "I watched you comfort Jenny. You braided her hair the way my sister used to braid mine before she died." The confession hung in the air between them. "I'd forgotten," he said quietly, "that people could be kind without agenda, that comfort could be offered without expectation of return. You've reminded me of something I thought I'd lost forever." Ilara leaned forward, seeing for the first time the man beneath the cold exterior. "What happened to you?" His dark eyes met hers. "The same thing that happened to you. Someone lied, and everyone believed it. The understanding that passed between them was a living thing, tangible and fierce. They were both casualties of other people's greed and betrayal, both condemned by lies, both fighting to reclaim truth from the ashes." Dorian stood to leave, but paused at the doorway. The dress you were wearing when they arrested you, you made it? Elara nodded, confused by the question. The stitching was extraordinary. The detail work on the bodice used a technique I've only seen in royal garments. Where did you learn it? I don't know. Elara looked down at her hands as though they belonged to a stranger. My mother taught me, supposedly. I don't remember learning any of it, but my hands remember. They've always known things my mind doesn't. Dorian's eyes widened with something like wonder. Isolde was trained at court. That technique, the way you layer the stitches to create depth and texture, is an Ashford tradition, passed mother to daughter for generations. It's documented in the royal archives. He crossed back to her, kneeling so they were eye level. Don't you see, Elara? You carry her legacy in your fingertips. That's proof no court can deny. Your mother survived long enough to teach you the one thing that could prove your heritage beyond any doubt. Elara stared at her hands, these ordinary hands that had sewn dresses for merchants' wives, that had stitched by candlelight to earn pennies, that had never known they carried the legacy of nobility in their muscle memory. She was protecting me, Elara whispered. Even in hiding, even in poverty, she was giving me proof of who I am. She was giving you a weapon, Dorian corrected gently, one that Lysandra and Edmund and all their conspirators never suspected. He stood, returning to the doorway. Get some rest, Lady Elara. Tomorrow, we begin gathering the evidence you'll need to reclaim what's yours. And your revenge? Elara asked quietly. Is that what this is? Dorian looked back, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Perhaps it started that way, but watching you these past days, the way you treat people with dignity, the way you refuse to be broken, I find I care less about revenge and more about justice. There's a difference, I'm learning. One you've taught me. He disappeared into the corridor, leaving Elara alone with her thoughts, her questions, and the growing certainty that everything, her life, her identity, perhaps even her heart, was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Outside, hidden in the tree line, the elderly woman in the hooded cloak watched Elara's window until the candle went dark. Then she melted back into the forest, a ghost protecting her last remaining treasure from the shadows. Chapter 4. The Dinner of Deception. Dorian found Elara in the library, 3 days after their midnight conversation, surrounded by books on heraldry and noble protocols. She looked up as he entered, wariness and curiosity warring in her expression. We need to establish your presence publicly, he said without preamble. A formal dinner, influential nobles. Let the Thorns know you exist and are under my protection. Elara set down the volume she'd been studying. You want to parade me like a prize horse. I want to make you visible. Dorian moved to the window, his back to her. Right now you're a ghost easy to eliminate, easier to deny. But if Lord Pemberton, Lady Ashworth, and others of consequence see you, acknowledge you, then you become real, substantial, harder to make disappear. And what will you tell them? That you're my ward, the daughter of an old friend. He turned back to face her. A carefully constructed partial truth. They'll suspect more, but they can't act without proof and a clear claim. This buys us time. Elara studied him, trying to read the man behind the marble facade. Time for what? To gather evidence, to build your case. His dark eyes held hers. To keep you alive long enough to reclaim what was stolen. The dinner was set for Friday evening. On Thursday afternoon, Beatrice appeared at Elara's door with an armful of gowns borrowed from the manor's storage dresses that had belonged to Dorian's mother and sister, preserved but outdated. His Grace thought one of these might suit, Beatrice said, laying them across the bed. Elara examined each with her seamstress's critical eye. Her fingers traced seams, tested fabric weight, assessed cuts and proportions. This one, the neckline would overwhelm my frame. This fabric is too heavy for the current fashion. I'd look like I'm wearing a costume. And this. She held up a pale pink confection. The color would wash me out entirely. Beatrice sighed. I feared as much. These are 20 years old at least. Do you have fabric? Elara asked suddenly. Good fabric, and scissors, and thread? Understanding dawned on the housekeeper's face. You want to make something. I'm an Ashford, aren't I? Elara's chin lifted with newfound determination. Let me look like one. Beatrice led her to a storage room filled with bolts of fabric, remnants of the manor's more prosperous days. Elara's hands trembled as she touched silk and velvet, her mind already designing, calculating, creating. She selected a deep midnight blue silk and silver brocade, the Ashford colours she'd discovered in her research. Subtle, she murmured, but unmistakable to those who know. She worked through the night, her needle flashing in candlelight, her fingers remembering techniques her conscious mind had never learned. The bodice took shape with intricate layered stitching, the Ashford tradition Dorian had identified. The skirt fell in elegant lines, modern but with classical proportions that spoke of timeless nobility. Silver thread created delicate patterns at the hem and cuffs, catching light like starlight on water. By dawn, exhaustion clouded her vision, but the gown was complete. Friday evening arrived with the inevitability of fate. Beatrice helped her dress, lacing the bodice, arranging her hair in an elegant style that revealed the graceful column of her neck. When Elara finally looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The seamstress had vanished, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in portrait galleries and royal courts. She descended the grand staircase with her heart pounding. Dorian waited in the entrance hall, consulting with the butler about the evening's arrangements. He turned as her footsteps whispered on the stairs and froze mid-step. For a long moment, he simply stared. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, admiration, something deeper she couldn't name. "You're not just a seamstress," he said finally, his voice rough. "You're an artist." Elara reached the bottom of the stairs, meeting his gaze with newfound confidence. "I'm an Ashford. We create beauty that lasts." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That you do." The nobles arrived in a procession of carriages, their jewels glittering, their laughter practiced and hollow. Elara watched from the drawing-room as they entered Lord Pemberton with his calculating eyes, Lady Ashworth with her shrewd assessment, various others whose names Beatrice had drilled into her memory. Then Lord Edmund Thorne stumbled through the door, his son Geoffrey supporting him with obvious embarrassment. Edmund was a ruin of a man, face bloated, clothes expensive but rumpled, the stench of alcohol preceding him. This was the man who had destroyed Dorian, who had stolen Ashford lands, who had built his fortune on betrayal and blood. And on his other arm, resplendent in emerald silk, was Lysandra Greaves. Their eyes met across the room, and Lysandra's face transformed. Shock, then fury, then a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. She had clearly believed Elara broken, hidden, defeated. Finding her here, alive, dressed in Ashford colours and standing beside the Duke, it was a slap across the face. "Miss Greaves," Dorian said smoothly, all cold courtesy. "How unexpected. I wasn't aware you'd accepted my invitation." Lord Thorne graciously included me. Lysandra's smile was poisonous honey. "As his son's betrothed, I have certain obligations to fulfill." So the engagement had been reinstated. With the temptress supposedly vanquished, Lysandra had reclaimed her prize. Geoffrey looked miserable, avoiding Elara's gaze entirely. She felt a distant pity for him, a weak man caught in stronger people's games. Dinner was announced, and they processed to the dining room in order of rank. Dorian escorted Lady Ashworth, leaving Elara to be led by Lord Pemberton. The older man studied her with unconcealed interest. "You're the Duke's ward, I understand." "For the present," Elara replied carefully. "And before that?" "A seamstress in Thornwick." His eyebrows rose. "A working woman. How progressive of Blackwood." The dining room was magnificent, candles reflected in silver, crystal catching light like captured stars. Elara found herself seated between Lord Pemberton and a younger lord she'd been introduced to, but whose name had already slipped her mind. Across the table, Lysandra watched her like a cat watching a wounded bird. The first courses passed in relative civility. Then Lysandra struck. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying clearly, "how does one transition from stitching dresses to dining with nobility? It must be quite disorienting." "One adapts," Elara replied evenly, "as humans have always done when circumstances change. Charity cases often do struggle with proper etiquette, though." Lysandra's smile sharpened. "All those little rules about which fork to use, how to address one's betters." Elara selected the fish fork with deliberate precision, using it exactly as protocol demanded. "Yes, etiquette can be challenging. Fortunately, proper breeding makes it second nature." Lady Ashworth made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Lord Pemberton leaned forward, intrigued. "His Grace mentioned you're investigating Miss Whitmore's heritage? Blackwood?" Dorian dabbed his mouth with his napkin, his movements unhurried. "Miss Whitmore is the daughter of an old friend who died years ago. I'm looking into her family connections." "How noble of you!" Lysandra interjected, though one wonders at the timing. Questionable lineages can be so useful when one needs leverage. Leverage? Alara kept her voice sweet, but steel ran beneath it. For those with ambitions beyond their station, a patron can be invaluable. Lysandra's eyes glittered. We all know what you are, Miss Whitmore, a seductress who tricked my Geoffrey, and now you've somehow tricked the Duke. Perhaps you learned these tricks from your mother, assuming she was actually a lady and not a... Alara stood so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. The entire table fell silent. My mother, she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury, was Lady Isolde Ashford, and she had more honor in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire being. The silence was absolute. Lady Ashworth set down her wineglass with deliberate care. Ashford, I thought I recognized something in you. You have the look, those eyes especially. She tilted her head, studying Alara with new intensity. I knew Isolde years ago. She was extraordinary. This is absurd, Lysandra sputtered. The Ashfords are dead. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what they were told. Lady Ashworth interrupted coolly. But the truth often has a way of surviving, doesn't it? Ilara's hands shook. She needed air, needed to escape the weight of all those eyes. If you'll excuse me, she murmured, and fled the dining room before anyone could respond. She found herself in the portrait gallery, pressing her forehead against the cool window glass, trying to steady her breathing. Behind her, the paintings of Blackwood ancestors stared down with their stern, judging faces. Then voices drifted from an adjacent room, the smoking room, where men retired after meals. The door must have been left slightly ajar. The girl is leverage, Blackwood. We all know it. Lord Pemberton's voice. Matter of fact. She's the key to unraveling the Thornshire situation. Dorian's reply was cold, emotionless, the Dark Duke in full force. Edmund Thorne's slurred voice joined in. You can't prove anything. The Ashfords died. Everyone knows they died. I made sure. He stopped, as if realizing he'd said too much. Not everyone died, Dorian said softly, dangerously. And once I have what I need from her bloodline documentation, testimony, proof of lineage, she can live quietly somewhere remote, perhaps a cottage by the sea. Somewhere she'll be safe and out of the way. Ilara's heart cracked like ice under pressure. She's useful now, Dorian continued, but sentiment doesn't factor into strategy. It never has. The world tilted. Ilara pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound. She'd been a fool. All his careful kindness, his midnight confessions, his seeming vulnerability, it had all been manipulation. She was a tool, a strategic piece on his chessboard, nothing more. The growing warmth between them, the connection she'd felt, it was an illusion, a lie. She straightened her spine, dried her eyes, and returned to the dining room on shaking legs. The guests had moved to the drawing room for after-dinner drinks. Dorian stood near the fireplace, conversing with Lady Ashworth. Ilara walked directly to him, her voice ringing clear in the sudden quiet. Your Grace, I thank you for your hospitality, but I will not be anyone's leverage. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to her. I may not have your power or wealth, Ilara continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. But I have something you clearly lack: integrity. Dorian's face was a study in shock, his mask cracking for the first time in public. Ilara, it's Miss Whitmore to you, Your Grace. She turned to address the room. You saved me from one executioner, only to become another kind yourself. Thank you for the lesson in exactly how cruel nobility can be. She walked from the room with her head high, leaving chaos in her wake. Lysandra's delighted laughter followed her into the corridor. An hour later, Dorian found her in her chambers, hastily packing the few belongings she possessed into a worn cloth bag. You were listening. His voice was flat, carefully neutral. Yes, and I heard the truth. Ilara didn't turn to face him. I'm a tool to you, a strategic piece on your chessboard. How convenient that I forgot that for a moment. You heard half a conversation out of context. Frustration finally broke through his composure. Those men are dangerous, Ilara. I was telling them what they needed to hear, playing a role. Really? She spun to face him, tears streaming now. And which role are you playing with me? The protector? The ally? The man who watches me braid a maid's hair and pretends to feel something human? You know nothing of what you've just done, Dorian said, anger replacing frustration. Pemberton, Edmund, they're vipers. By confronting me publicly, you've shown them weakness, shown them that you matter. And you're different from them. How? Exactly, Ilara's voice broke. You use people, you manipulate, you play games with lives because your heart is too frozen to care about the damage. Dorian stared at her, and for a moment she thought she saw genuine pain in his dark eyes. Then his mask slammed back into place. Pack if you must, he said coldly. But you have nowhere to go. Lysandra will have people watching every road, every inn. Without my protection, you're dead within a week. He turned to leave, paused at the door. Without looking back, he said quietly, For what it's worth, you were magnificent tonight. Your mother would be proud. Then, softer, almost to himself, And I am, becoming someone I don't recognize, because of you. But Ilara was crying too hard to hear the last part. The door closed with a soft click, leaving her alone with her broken trust and the terrible knowledge that, even if Dorian had been playing a role with those men, she had no way of knowing where the performance ended and the truth began. In the corridor, Dorian pressed his back against the wall, his eyes closed, his bandaged hand throbbing with remembered pain. He'd caught a blade for her, but he couldn't catch her trust, and now he wondered if that loss would destroy him more thoroughly than Edmund Thorne ever had. Chapter 5. Fractured Trust. Ilara refused to leave her chambers the next day. She sat by the window, watching clouds drift across the pale sky, her untouched breakfast tray growing cold on the table. Her fingers traced patterns on the glass, intricate stitching designs her hands knew by instinct, comfort in repetition when her mind offered none. Below, in his study, Dorian Blackwood poured his third glass of brandy before noon. He stood before the window on the opposite side of the manor, staring at nothing, replaying Ilara's words in an endless, punishing loop. You saved me from one executioner, only to become another kind yourself. He'd faced enemy fire without flinching, endured court-martial with his head held high, survived Catherine's betrayal with his pride intact. But the way Ilara had looked at him last night, with betrayal and disappointment darkening those silver-grey eyes, had shattered something he'd thought long dead. The realization terrified him. He cared what she thought, cared desperately, in a way that made him vulnerable, that gave her power to wound him more thoroughly than Edmund Thorne ever had. A knock interrupted his spiral. Beatrice entered without waiting for permission, her expression stern. "This is madness," she announced. "The girl is upstairs crying, and you're down here drinking yourself into oblivion, both of you too stubborn to take the first step. She thinks I'm using her, because you let her think that." Beatrice crossed her arms. "I've served you for 15 years, Your Grace. I watched you build those walls around your heart, brick by bitter brick, but I've also watched her tear them down in a matter of days. That terrifies you more than any enemy ever could." Dorian said nothing, which was answer enough. "Tell her the truth," Beatrice urged. "All of it, before it's too late." Upstairs, Beatrice brought tea to Ilara's chambers, settling into the chair beside the window with the comfortable authority of someone who'd earned the right. "You haven't eaten," she observed. "I'm not hungry." "Heartbreak does steal the appetite." Beatrice poured tea with steady hands. "But starving yourself won't change what happened." Ilara accepted the cup but didn't drink. "He was using me. I heard him say it." "You heard him playing a role." Beatrice's voice was gentle but firm. "I've served the Duke for 15 years, child. I've never seen him like this, distracted, unguarded, almost human again." She leaned forward, her kind eyes intent. "Let me tell you about the man who saved you. 10 years ago, his best friend betrayed him, his fiancée abandoned him, and his sister died in his arms from fever while he was under house arrest, unable to get proper physicians. He survived by becoming stone cold, calculating, impenetrable. That doesn't excuse." "I'm not excusing, I'm explaining." Beatrice took Ilara's hand. "You're the first person who's made him want to tear those walls down. That conversation you overheard? He was protecting you by making you seem like a pawn, so Pemberton and Edmund wouldn't see you as a genuine threat to their schemes. If they'd known how much you matter to him, they'd have used it against you both." Ilara wanted desperately to believe this. But trust, once broken, didn't mend easily. "How can I know what's real and what's performance?" "Because I see how he looks at you when you're not watching," Beatrice said simply. "The same way you look at him." That morning, before the household stirred, Dorian had walked to Thornwick's town square. Dawn painted the cobblestones in shades of rose and gold, transforming the site of Ilara's near destruction into something almost peaceful. Willem was there, sitting on the platform's edge, carving wood with patient precision. The executioner's axe was gone, replaced by craftsman's tools. Wood shavings curled at his feet like pale flower petals. "Your Grace." Willem set down his work, moving to stand. "Don't." Dorian gestured for him to remain seated. "I came to ask you something. That day, why did you drop the axe?" Willem was quiet for a long moment, his scarred hands still. "I've done terrible things at the magistrate's orders, hurt people who may not have deserved it, all because I was afraid of losing my position, my income. I told myself I was just following orders." He looked up at Dorian, his eyes haunted. "But when you caught that blade with your bare hand, when you bled for a stranger, I saw someone brave enough to say, 'No more.' You showed me that refusing evil is possible, even when it costs you." His voice roughened. "You freed us both that day, Your Grace, her from the mob and me from the man I'd become." Dorian left the square with Willem's words echoing in his mind. Elara's courage had rippled outward in ways neither of them had anticipated, changing lives, offering possibilities for redemption. He couldn't let her believe he'd saved her only for strategy, not when the truth was so much more complicated, so much more dangerous to his carefully guarded heart. In a drawing room across town, Lysandra Greaves spread documents across a table, her pale eyes scanning yellowed pages with predatory focus. The corrupt magistrate, Horace Graves, a distant cousin who owed his position to her family's influence, hovered nervously nearby. "You're certain?" Lysandra demanded. "The records are clear." Horace pointed to a census document from 18 years prior. "Lady Helena Ashford wasn't at the estate during the massacre. She survived. And there've been rumors of an elderly woman living in the forest north of Blackwood Manor for years." Lysandra's smile was a blade. "Then we find her, eliminate her, then the girl. With all Ashford heirs dead, no one can contest the Thornshire claim. The Duke will be discredited when it's revealed he's harboring false nobility." Lysandra stood, her emerald skirts rustling. "Geoffrey remains infatuated with that creature, which makes my engagement precarious. I won't lose everything I've worked for because of some seamstress with delusions of grandeur." She turned to the two men standing in the shadows, hired muscle with hard faces and empty eyes. "Find Lady Helena. Don't kill her yet, she may be useful as bait, but make sure she can't interfere." Despite Beatrice's warnings, Elara needed air, needed escape from the suffocating confusion of her chambers. She walked the estate grounds as afternoon shadows lengthened, following stone paths through overgrown gardens that spoke of former glory. Movement at the forest's edge caught her attention. The elderly woman in the hooded cloak stood beneath an ancient oak, closer than she'd ever been before. This time, Elara could see her face lined with age but still beautiful, with high cheekbones and a graceful bearing that spoke of nobility. Their eyes met across the garden, and Elara's breath caught. The woman's expression held such longing, such fierce recognition and love, that it was almost painful to witness. "Wait," Elara called, moving toward her. "Please, who are you?" But the woman shook her head, pressing one gnarled hand to her heart, a gesture of farewell, and promise both then melted back into the forest like morning mist. Elara returned to the manor shaking, seeking the one person who might have answers. She found Dorian in the library, staring at an open book he clearly wasn't reading. "The woman," she said without preamble. "I saw her again, elderly, but noble bearing, silver-grey eyes like mine." "Who is she?" Dorian's face went carefully blank. "Describe her. Everything." Elara did, watching tension gather in his shoulders with each detail. When she finished, he stood abruptly, moving to the window as if needing distance. "It can't be," he muttered. "She died years ago. Everyone said so." "Who?" Elara demanded, crossing to stand beside him. "Tell me." He turned to face her, and for the first time since the disastrous dinner, he looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "Your grandmother, Lady Helena Ashford. She was reported dead in the massacre, but if she survived." His eyes widened with sudden understanding. "She's been protecting you all this time, from the shadows." Before Elara could respond, Beatrice appeared in the doorway. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore, you both need to speak. Clear the air before it poisons everything." She ushered them to chairs by the fireplace with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to manage noble stubbornness, then firmly closed the door as she left. Silence stretched between them, loaded with all the words left unspoken. Dorian broke first. "I want to explain something." "May I?" Elara studied him, the tense set of his shoulders, the careful neutrality he wore like armor. "You may speak." He unwound the bandage from his hand, revealing the healing scar that bisected his palm. "This is real," he said quietly. "The blood I shed for you, the pain I felt that was real. Not strategy, not calculation. In that moment, I acted on instinct alone." He met her gaze directly. "The words you overheard at dinner, those were theatre. Performance for men who would use any perceived weakness against us both. If Edmund and Pemberton thought you mattered to me personally, they'd hurt you to hurt me. But if they believe you're just strategy, they'll underestimate you. And underestimating you would be their greatest mistake." "How can I know the difference?" Elara's voice was barely a whisper. "Between what's real and what's performance. Because I'm telling you now, without audience, without agenda." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "I underestimated you once. I won't make that mistake again." Elara considered this, her seamstress's instincts trained to see the truth beneath surface appearances. She saw no deception in his face, only raw honesty that looked like it cost him dearly. "If we're to work together," she said finally, "I need full truth. What is your goal, Dorian? Your real goal?" He flinched at the use of his given name, but didn't correct her. "Edmund Thorne betrayed me and holds lands stolen from your family. I want justice. You deserve your heritage. Our goals align perfectly. But somewhere along the way, this became about more than revenge or duty." He struggled with the words, unused to vulnerability. "It became about—" "Say it," Elara urged softly. "You've reminded me what it feels like to hope, to believe people can be genuine, can be good without agenda." His voice roughened. "I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." Elara's heart ached with the confession. "Then don't lie to me again, even to protect me, especially to protect me." "Agreed." He extended his scarred hand. "Partners?" She placed her hand in his, feeling the ridge of scar tissue beneath her fingers. "Partners." Over the next 2 days, something shifted between them. Elara insisted on learning to defend herself, and Dorian agreed to teach her the basics. In the Manor's training room, a space clearly unused for years, he showed her how to break a hold, how to use an attacker's momentum against them, how to strike vulnerable points with maximum effect. "Again," he instructed, as she attempted to break his grip on her wrist. Elara twisted, used the technique he'd demonstrated, and suddenly found herself free, her momentum carrying her forward into his chest. His arms came up automatically to steady her, and they froze, faces inches apart, breathing hard from exertion. The tension between them shifted, transformed from distrust to something electric and dangerous. His gaze dropped to her lips. She swayed toward him, drawn by heat and promise. "Your Grace!" Beatrice's voice shattered the moment. "Captain Redfield has arrived with urgent news." They sprang apart like guilty children. Dorian cleared his throat, professional mask sliding back into place. "Send him in." Captain Marcus Redfield was a tall man with a soldier's bearing and shrewd eyes that missed nothing, including the flushed faces and labored breathing of the room's occupants. A slight smile tugged at his mouth, but he had the grace not to comment. "Your Grace, Miss Whitmore." He bowed to each in turn. "I bring troubling news. Lysandra Greaves has convinced the magistrate to issue a formal warrant for Miss Whitmore's arrest. She's gathering mercenaries and plans to petition the Crown to revoke your protection on grounds that you're harboring a criminal." "On what grounds?" Dorian demanded. "The original charges, plus new ones: fraud, impersonating nobility, conspiracy." Marcus's expression darkened. "She's also been asking questions about the Ashford massacre, very specific questions. Someone is helping her, feeding her information about what really happened 20 years ago." Dorian and Elara exchanged glances. "We need to move faster," Dorian said. "Elara, it's time you knew everything about your family, everything about what happened and why." Elara straightened her shoulders, that core of steel showing through. "And it's time we stopped reacting and started acting. What's our next move?" Dorian's smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. "Our move? You're a quick study in strategy too." Marcus chuckled. "I like her. Your Grace." Dorian looked at Elara with unveiled admiration, something warm and dangerous kindling in his expression. "So do I, Captain, far more than is convenient." Elara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but held his gaze. "Then it's fortunate I'm not particularly interested in being convenient." "Fortunate indeed," Dorian murmured. Marcus cleared his throat. "If you two are quite finished?" They both flushed, but neither looked away from the other. Outside, Hidden in the forest's shadows, Lady Helena Ashford watched the manor with fierce, protective love. She'd seen the mercenaries gathering, knew time was running short. Soon, she would have to step out of hiding, reveal herself, risk everything. But not yet. Not until the moment was right. Her granddaughter was learning to fight, learning to trust, learning to be the Ashford heir she was born to be. Helena would guard her from the shadows a little longer, just until Elara was ready to stand in the light. Chapter 6. The Gathering Storm. The study felt smaller, with 3 people gathered around Dorian's desk, the weight of 20 years of secrets pressing against the walls. Maps and documents covered every surface, bloodlines traced in careful ink, property deeds with forged signatures, letters stained with age and urgency. Captain Marcus Redfield stood at attention, though his posture softened when he looked at Elara. "What I'm about to tell you, Miss Whitmore, has been buried under lies and murder for 2 decades, but you deserve to know the truth of what was stolen from you." Elara's hands clenched in her lap. Dorian moved to stand beside her chair, close enough that she could feel his presence, solid and reassuring. 20 years ago, Marcus began, the Ashford family uncovered a conspiracy at the highest levels of government. Certain advisors to the king were plotting to manipulate the succession to place a puppet on the throne they could control. Lord Edmund Thorne was central to this conspiracy, Dorian added, his voice hard as granite, along with several others who remain in power today. The Ashfords were hereditary advisors to the crown. When they discovered the plot, they became targets. Marcus unrolled a document, a letter in faded ink, the handwriting elegant but hurried. "Your mother, Lady Isolde Ashford, gathered evidence, names, dates, financial records proving the conspiracy. She was preparing to present it directly to the king when they came for us," Elara finished softly, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. "The Ashford estate was attacked at night," Marcus confirmed. "Fire, violence, systematic execution. Everyone was presumed killed. The official story claimed the Ashfords themselves had committed treason and fled the country to avoid prosecution. But my mother survived." Elara's voice was steady despite the tears threatening. "She escaped with me." Dorian knelt beside her chair, his dark eyes holding hers. "Isolde was brilliant and brave. She took you and disappeared into the common world, became a seamstress, raised you alone, taught you her craft but hid your heritage to protect you from those who'd already killed everyone else she loved. She died when I was 3, Elara whispered. "Pneumonia," they said. "But she'd already given me everything I needed, the skills, the techniques that prove who I am." "She left you a legacy in your fingertips," Dorian agreed gently. "Proof that no one could take away." Marcus cleared his throat. "There's more. Lady Helena Ashford, your grandmother and the family matriarch, also survived. She wasn't at the estate during the attack. She'd been visiting relatives in the north. By the time she learned what happened, everyone was dead or missing." Elara's breath caught. "The woman in the forest, she's been watching over me." "For years," Marcus confirmed. "She's been in hiding, gathering her own evidence, waiting for the right moment. She couldn't intervene at the square without exposing both herself and you to greater danger. The conspirators have agents everywhere in the magistrate's office, the constabulary, even at court. Trust no one," Dorian said grimly. "That's been our operating principle." Elara stood, pacing to the window, processing the enormity of it all. "So, if I can prove my identity and heritage—" "You inherit the Duchy of Thornshire," Marcus finished. "The lands, the title, the political influence. Everything the Thorns stole would be stripped away. And the evidence my mother and grandmother gathered," Elara continued, her mind racing, "could expose the entire conspiracy, destroy everyone involved." "Precisely." Dorian moved to stand beside her. "But you must be formally recognized by the crown. That requires presenting yourself at court, with irrefutable proof of your lineage and the endorsement of established nobility, which is why Lysandra is so desperate to eliminate me before I can do that." Elara turned to face them both. "She knows all of this. Someone's been feeding her information. Someone with access to old records and buried secrets," Marcus agreed darkly. "We're working to identify the source, but time is running short." A knock interrupted them. Beatrice entered, her face pale. "Your Grace, riders have been spotted on the North Road. At least 20 men, heavily armed." Dorian's jaw tightened. "It's begun. Marcus, mobilize our defenses." The next hours passed in organized chaos. Captain Redfield's soldiers, men who'd served with Dorian in the military and remained loyal despite his disgrace, arrived and took positions throughout the manor. Windows were barricaded, weapons distributed, escape routes planned. Elara refused to hide in her chambers. Instead, she moved through the preparations with focused purpose, her seamstress's knowledge proving unexpectedly valuable. "This armor," she told a young soldier, examining a weak point in his leather chest piece. "The stitching here is compromised. One good strike, and it'll split. Let me reinforce it." Her needle flashed, strengthening vulnerable seams, adding protective layers where fabric met metal. The soldiers watched with growing respect as she worked with swift efficiency. In the manor's great hall, she spread out fabric across a table, deep blue silk and silver thread. Thomas, the footman she'd befriended, helped her stretch it taut. "What are you making, miss?" he asked. "A declaration." Elara's hands moved with practiced precision, creating the Ashford crest she'd studied in the library, a rising phoenix crowned with stars. If Lysandra wants a fight, let her know exactly who she's fighting. By evening, the banner was complete. Elara held it up to the fading light, and something fierce and proud swelled in her chest. This was her heritage, her family, her truth made visible. Dorian found her there, surrounded by servants who'd helped with the work. His expression when he saw the banner admiration mixed with something deeper, something vulnerable, made her heart race. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. They left the manor's bustle, walking the estate grounds as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The air smelled of coming rain and wild roses, peaceful despite the storm gathering. "Tell me about your sister," Elara said. "Beatrice mentioned her, but you haven't spoken of her." Dorian was quiet for several steps. "Amelia. She died of fever when she was 12. I was 17, home on leave from my first military posting." His voice roughened with old grief. "She used to braid wildflowers into her hair and sing off-key. Drove our mother mad, but I loved it. She was fearless. Fierce reminded everyone that being noble didn't mean being cold." He glanced at Elara. "You remind me of her. That same spirit that refuses to be dimmed." Elara's throat tightened. "My mother used to sing to me. I can't remember the words, just the melody and the feeling of absolute safety. Like nothing bad could ever touch me as long as she held me." "I'll keep you safe," Dorian said. The promise weighted with everything unsaid between them. Whatever it costs. They'd reached the manor's small chapel, a stone structure covered in ivy, its stained glass windows glowing faintly in the dusk. Elara stopped, turning to face him. "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." She looked up at him, her silver-grey eyes searching his face. "Why did you really save me? Be honest." Dorian was silent for a long moment, struggling with words he'd kept locked away for so long. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and intense. "Because when I saw you in that square, defiant even in terror, I saw someone worth saving. Not for strategy, not for revenge, worth saving simply because you existed." He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because your eyes held something I thought was lost in this world, genuine innocence, real courage, not the performance of it, but the actual thing. Because I'd spent 10 years being cold and strategic, making every decision based on calculated benefit, and in that moment, I chose to be human again." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And because the moment I caught that blade, the moment my blood touched your skin, something in me caught fire. Something I thought had died with Catherine's betrayal." Elara reached up, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the scar across his palm. "This must have hurt." "I barely felt it." His hand closed gently around hers. "I was too focused on you, on the certainty that I couldn't let them harm you, couldn't let them take one more beautiful thing from this world." She lifted his scarred palm to her lips, pressing a kiss to the raised tissue. When she looked up, his expression had transformed, all his careful control burned away, leaving raw need and wonder. "Elara, She kissed him, cutting off whatever confession he'd been building toward. The kiss was tentative at first, a question, then deepening as he responded with fierce tenderness. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the thundering of his heart against her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dorian rested his forehead against hers. "I can't promise you safety. I can't even promise you tomorrow." "Then promise me tonight." Elara's hands fisted in his jacket. "Promise me honesty. Promise me partnership. Promise me you'll never treat me as less than your equal." "I promise," he breathed, and kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring everything he couldn't say into the press of lips and the desperate grip of hands. They stood in the chapel's shadow, wrapped in each other, the world narrowing to just this moment, this feeling, this truth between them that needed no words. Finally, reluctantly, they pulled apart. Dorian took her hand, lacing their fingers together, and they began walking back toward the manor. The lights in the windows looked warm and welcoming, a home rather than a fortress. Then alarm bells shattered the peace. The sound pierced the twilight like a knife, urgent and terrifying. Dorian immediately moved to shield Ilara, his body between her and any potential threat. Marcus appeared from the darkness, running toward them, his face grim. "They're coming. Lysandra's forces, they're at the gates." "Already?" Dorian's mind raced. "They're early by at least a day." "She must have learned about Lady Helena," Marcus said. "About her being nearby. She's forcing the confrontation before we can unite your claims." Dorian gripped Ilara's hand, pulling her toward the manor. "Stay close to me, when the fighting starts." "No." Ilara planted her feet, her voice surprisingly calm despite the chaos. "Where's my Ashford banner?" Both men stared at her. Understanding dawned in Dorian's eyes. "You want them to see you. You want to claim your identity publicly, right now." "I'm tired of hiding." Ilara's chin lifted with that familiar defiance. "Tired of being protected and hidden like some shameful secret. Let's show them what an Ashford looks like when she fights back." A fierce smile spread across Dorian's face, pride and admiration, and something deeper. "Have I mentioned how magnificent you are? You can tell me again after we survive this." She pulled him down for a quick, hard kiss, tasting desperation and promise. "Get the banner," Dorian ordered Marcus, "and tell the men we defend Lady Ilara Ashford tonight. Let everyone know who stands with us." They raced toward the manor together, hands still linked, running toward battle and truth, and the terrifying possibility that love might be worth fighting for after all. Behind them, watching from the forest's edge, Lady Helena Ashford saw the banner raised above Blackwood Manor, saw her granddaughter standing tall beside the dark Duke, and smiled through her tears. The time for hiding was over. The time for justice had begun. Chapter 7. Siege and Betrayal. The mob arrived like a plague, torches blazing in the darkness, voices raised in manufactured rage. Lysandra Greaves rode at their head on a white mare, her blonde hair gleaming in the firelight, looking every inch the righteous crusader leading the faithful against corruption. "The Duke harbors a criminal," her voice carried across the grounds with theatrical precision. "He defies the magistrate's lawful warrant. He shelters a woman who has deceived us all, claiming noble blood to which she has no right." Behind her, hired mercenaries mingled with townspeople she'd manipulated with lies and coin. Ilara recognized faces from the square, the baker who'd once praised her stitching, the merchant who'd commissioned dresses for his daughters. Now they carried weapons and hatred, convinced they served justice. Dorian's forces held the walls, soldiers positioned at strategic points, but they were outnumbered 3-1. The odds were grim, and everyone knew it. Ilara climbed to the battlements, her Ashford banner gripped in white-knuckled hands. The wind caught the silk, sending the phoenix and stars rippling against the night sky. Below, she could see Lysandra's face contort with fury at the sight. "I am Lady Ilara Ashford." Ilara's voice rang out, clear and strong, carrying across the assembled crowd. "Rightful heir to Thornshire, these accusations are lies built on murder and conspiracy." For a moment, uncertainty rippled through the mob. Then Lysandra screamed, "She lies! Attack! Take the manor!" The siege began in earnest. Mercenaries surged toward the gates with a battering ram. Arrows flew from both sides, deadly birds seeking flesh. Dorian moved along the walls with Marcus, directing the defense with military precision. His sword flashed in the torchlight, each movement economical and lethal, protecting his people with the skill that had once made him a decorated commander. Ilara remained on the battlements, her elevated position allowing her to see the entire battlefield. She called out warnings when she spotted mercenaries attempting to flank their defenses, coordinated the movement of defenders to weak points in their line. "3 men scaling the east wall," she shouted to Marcus, who immediately redirected soldiers to intercept. When the first wounded were carried back from the gates, Ilara descended to help. Her seamstress hands, trained for delicate work, proved surprisingly steady with bandages and tourniquets. She worked alongside the household physician, her dress soon stained with blood that wasn't her own. "Hold still," she murmured to a young soldier with an arrow wound in his shoulder, her fingers gentle but firm as she cleaned and dressed the injury. "You're going to be fine." The battle raged for what felt like hours but was likely less than one. Then a crash echoed from the courtyard. Part of the east gate had given way. 5 mercenaries poured through the breach before Marcus's men could seal it. Elara looked up from the wounded to find 3 of them bearing down on her position, swords drawn, eyes cold with mercenary purpose. She grabbed a fallen sword, her hands remembering the defensive stances Dorian had drilled into her. When the first man lunged, she sidestepped exactly as she'd been taught, using his momentum to throw him off balance. Her blade caught him across the arm, not a killing blow, but enough to make him drop his weapon. The second attacker was faster, more skilled. Their blades met with a clash that sent shocks up her arms. She was losing ground, desperately blocking strikes she had no hope of countering. Then Dorian was there, a whirlwind of controlled violence. Within seconds, all 3 mercenaries were down, disarmed or disabled. "I told you to stay back," he shouted, terror making his voice harsh. His hands gripped her shoulders, checking for injuries with frantic thoroughness. "And I told you I'm not helpless," Elara countered, her chest heaving. "I can fight." Despite the chaos around them, despite the blood and screaming, Dorian pulled her against him and kissed her hard, desperate and claiming, "Don't ever scare me like that again." Before she could respond, Beatrice appeared from the manor entrance, her face white with panic. "Child, something's wrong inside. The corridors, there are men who aren't ours." Realization struck Elara like ice water. The attack is a distraction. Dorian's eyes widened with understanding. "They're inside, looking for you." They raced into the manor, Beatrice leading them through service corridors. Bodies littered the hallway, servants who'd tried to resist. At the end of the corridor stood Thomas, the footman whose livery Elara had mended, whose name she'd remembered. The footman whose father had supposedly died in Dorian's service, earning him a position of trust. "Thomas?" Elara's voice broke on the name. "Nothing personal, miss." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "But Lysandra pays well, and the Duke's protection won't last forever. Better to be on the winning side." 3 assassins emerged from the shadows behind him, professional killers with dead eyes and efficient movements. "Run!" Beatrice shoved Elara backward as the assassins attacked. The fight was brutal and swift. The 2 guards with them engaged the assassins while Beatrice pulled Elara toward an alternate route. One assassin broke through, his blade finding Beatrice's side. She cried out but remained standing, pushing Elara behind her. "Go!" Beatrice gasped. "Find his grace." But in the confusion, Elara was separated from everyone. She ran through corridors she'd explored during sleepless nights, her knowledge of the manor's layout, her only advantage. Behind her, footsteps pounded, 3 assassins in pursuit. She ducked through a servant's passage, emerged in the main hall, raced toward the library. If she could reach it, barricade the door, call for help. The library door slammed behind her. She grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, the only weapon available. Through the windows, she could see the battle still raging outside, so close to help, yet impossibly far. The door exploded inward. The 3 assassins entered with predatory grace, spreading out to cut off escape routes. Elara backed toward the far wall, poker raised, heart hammering. She would fight. She would not make this easy. Then Thomas appeared in the doorway, holding something white, a cloth soaked in something that made her eyes water even from a distance. "I'm sorry," he said, and he almost sounded sincere. "Orders are orders." Elara lunged for the window, desperate to break through, to scream for Dorian. But the assassins were faster. Hands grabbed her arms, and the cloth pressed against her face. Chemical sweetness flooded her nose and mouth. She fought, thrashing and kicking, but the chloroform was inexorable. Her vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges. The library door crashed open again. Through the haze, she saw Dorian, saw his face transformed with terror and rage. "Elara!" She tried to reach for him, tried to say his name, but darkness swallowed her whole. When consciousness returned briefly, she was being carried through a tunnel, the secret passage Thomas had opened for them. She struggled weakly, but hands held her firm. Then the cloth came down again, and she knew nothing more. Dorian reached the spot where Elara had stood seconds too late. He found only her dropped poker and the faint chemical smell of chloroform. The secret passage behind the bookshelf stood open, mocking him. Something inside him broke. He roared, a sound of pure anguish, and overturned the massive desk with inhuman strength. Books cascaded from shelves, a chair shattered against the wall. 10 years of careful control, of measured responses, of protecting his heart, all of it burned away in the face of losing her. Marcus found him destroying what remained of the furniture, bleeding from where he'd punched the wall hard enough to split his knuckles. "Your Grace!" Marcus grabbed his shoulders, forcing Dorian to look at him. "We'll find her." "They have her, Marcus." Dorian's voice cracked, his face devastated. "I promised to keep her safe. I promised, and you will." I finally let someone in. The confession tore from him like blood from a mortal wound. I finally allowed myself to feel again, to hope, to love, and I failed her, just like I failed Catherine, like I failed Amelia. "No," Marcus shook him hard. "Catherine betrayed you, and Amelia's death was not your fault. But Ilara, you gave her something to fight for. That woman is a warrior. She'll survive until we reach her." Dorian's hands shook as he covered his face. "I love her, Marcus. I didn't want to, didn't mean to, but somewhere between catching that blade and watching her braid Jenny's hair and kissing her in the chapel garden, I fell completely, irrevocably in love with her." "I know," Marcus's voice gentled. "Everyone knows. The way you look at her, I've served with you for 15 years, and I've never seen you like this. Because I've never had this much to lose." Marcus pulled him toward the window. Outside, the mercenaries were retreating, Lysandra's forces pulling back now that they'd accomplished their objective. The siege had been a distraction from the beginning, designed to create chaos while they stole what Lysandra truly wanted. "We repelled the attack," Marcus reported. "Minimal casualties on our side. Beatrice is wounded but stable. The physician says she'll recover. But Thomas is gone, vanished with the assassins and Lady Ilara." Dorian's jaw set with cold determination, the anguish transforming into something harder, more dangerous. "Find Thomas. Find everyone involved. I want names, locations, anything." A commotion at the gate interrupted him. Soldiers were challenging someone trying to enter. "Let him through," Marcus ordered, recognizing the figure. Willem, the former executioner turned carpenter, entered the courtyard. His clothes were torn, his face scratched from running through the forest, but his eyes were clear and purposeful. "Your Grace," he panted. "I tracked the kidnappers. I know where they've taken her." Dorian crossed the courtyard in 3 strides. "Where?" "The old textile mill, north of town. Abandoned for 10 years, but I saw lights, heard voices." Willem's scarred hands clenched. "They have guards posted, at least a dozen men." "Why help me?" Dorian asked, studying the man who'd nearly executed Ilara weeks ago. Willem met his gaze squarely. "Because that woman showed me courage, showed me that saying no to evil is possible, even when it costs everything, and because I'll never again stand by while the innocent suffer. Not as long as I draw breath." Dorian clasped his shoulder. "Then stand with me now." Within minutes, a strike team assembled. Marcus, Willem, 10 of Dorian's best soldiers. They checked weapons, prepared horses, moved with the efficient precision of men trained for war. Dorian stood in the courtyard, examining his scarred hand in the torchlight. He could still feel Ilara's lips pressed against the raised tissue, could still hear her voice promising him honesty and partnership. "Hold on, Ilara," he whispered to the night. "I'm coming, and nothing in this world or the next will stop me from reaching you." They rode into the darkness, toward the abandoned mill and whatever horrors awaited there. Behind them, Blackwood Manor stood battered but unbroken, Ilara's Ashford banner still flying from the highest tower, a declaration and a promise that this story was far from over. In the forest, Lady Helena watched them go, her own small band of loyal retainers gathering around her. She'd remained hidden long enough. It was time to reclaim what had been stolen, to protect what remained. It was time to remind the world what happened to those who threatened an Ashford. Chapter 8. Rescue and Reckoning. Ilara woke to the smell of dust and old machinery oil. Her head throbbed from the chloroform, her mouth tasted of chemicals, and her hands were bound behind her back with rope that bit into her wrists. As her vision cleared, she recognized where she was, the abandoned textile mill on the edge of Thornwick, a place where fabric had once been woven and dreams of prosperity had died with the industry's collapse. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. They'd brought the seamstress to a tomb of her trade. Finally awake, I was beginning to worry the dose was too strong. Lysandra Greaves paced before her, still in her emerald silk gown, though it was now torn and stained. Her perfect blonde ringlets had come loose, her face was flushed, and something manic glittered in her pale blue eyes. The composed socialite had cracked, revealing something desperate and dangerous beneath. Finally, the precious Ashford heir is mine. Lysandra's laugh was unhinged. Do you know how long I've waited for this moment? Elara's tongue felt thick, her thoughts sluggish from the drug. Why? The word came out slurred. Why do you hate me so much? Something in Lysandra snapped at the question. She stopped pacing, turned to face Elara fully, and for the first time, genuine emotion, raw and bleeding, showed through her mask. 7 years ago, Lysandra began, her voice trembling, I attended a military ball. I was 19, beautiful, sought after by every eligible man in attendance. And then I saw him, Dorian Blackwood, newly returned from war, decorated and devastatingly handsome despite the shadows in his eyes. She moved closer, crouching so they were eye level. I fell instantly, completely in love. I pursued him for months, attended every event he might be at, engineered introductions, made my interest abundantly clear, but he remained polite and distant, locked in grief over his dead fiancée. Lysandra's face contorted with remembered humiliation. I interpreted his distance as rejection. Me rejected by a man everyone whispered was broken, damaged. I felt humiliated, small. My pride couldn't bear it. She stood, resuming her pacing. That pride turned to obsession. I needed him to see me, to choose me, but he never did. He just retreated to his manor and disappeared from society entirely. And my obsession curdled into hatred for him, for myself, for everyone who'd witnessed my failure. Then Geoffrey developed his pathetic infatuation with you, Lysandra continued, her voice rising. And suddenly I saw an opportunity. Revenge against you for catching his eye. Revenge against Dorian for never noticing mine. I'd destroy you both. Elara's head was clearing, the fog lifting. You fabricated the charges, convinced Geoffrey to lie. Geoffrey didn't lie, he was genuinely infatuated. I simply reframed events, made his innocent crush sound like seduction, your kindness look like manipulation. Lysandra's smile was poisonous. It would have worked perfectly. You'd be marked, humiliated, destroyed. Geoffrey would return to me, and perhaps, finally Dorian would notice me, see what I was capable of. But then he saved me, Elara said quietly. But then he saved you, Lysandra shrieked. And I realized there was more to your story. I started investigating, used my father's legal connections to access old records, and I discovered the truth. You're not just some seamstress who rejected my fiancé. You're an Ashford, the key to power, to wealth, to everything. She knelt again, her face inches from Elara's. If I eliminate you and your grandmother, I can claim I've ended the Ashford threat. The Thorns will reward me handsomely for protecting their stolen lands. The Crown will thank me for preventing a succession crisis. And Dorian, her voice broke, Dorian will finally have to notice me. Despite the fear coursing through her, despite the ropes and the danger, Elara laughed. The sound was sharp and cutting in the dusty mill. You think killing me will make him love you? Elara's voice strengthened with each word. You're delusional. He'll never forgive you, never even look at you without disgust. Lysandra's hand cracked across Elara's face, the slap echoing in the empty space. You could have been anything, done anything. Elara continued, tasting blood. You're beautiful, wealthy, educated. Instead, you're just sad. A sad woman who confused obsession with love and built a life on spite. Doubt flickered in Lysandra's eyes for just a moment. Then she straightened, her mask of control struggling to reassert itself. We'll see who's sad when you're dead, and I'm the heroine who saved the kingdom from a pretender. She turned to confer with the mercenaries stationed near the mill's entrance, her voice too low for Elara to hear. Elara didn't waste the opportunity. Her hands remembered the feel of stubborn knots, the way thread could be teased apart if you knew exactly where to apply pressure. She worked the ropes binding her wrists, finding the pattern, locating the weak point where the binding crossed itself, one finger free. Then another. She pulled, twisted, her seamstress's knowledge of how things were constructed telling her precisely how to deconstruct them. What's your name? The young mercenary guarding her, barely more than a boy, really, with a face full of freckles and fear, startled at her soft question. Peter, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Peter, why are you here? What did Lysandra promise you? He was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, my sister's sick. Consumption. The physician says she needs to go to a sanitarium by the sea, but we can't afford it. Miss Greaves offered enough coin to save her. Ilara's hands continued working as she spoke. "If you help me, I promise the Duke will help your sister. He's a man of honor, Peter, a good man, and he has resources that don't require you to become a kidnapper." Peter glanced at Lysandra, then back to Ilara. She saw the struggle in his young face, desperation warring with conscience. "The door on the east side," he whispered finally. "It's unguarded for the next 10 minutes. I'm supposed to be checking the perimeter." "Thank you." Ilara's last finger slipped free. "You're saving more than just me." Peter walked away, his shoulders hunched with the weight of his choice. Outside, the night exploded with violence. Dorian's forces hit the mill with tactical precision born from years of military command. Marcus led the frontal assault, his soldiers engaging Lysandra's mercenaries with overwhelming force. Gunfire cracked through the darkness, steel rang against steel. Dorian moved like shadow around the perimeter, 4 of his best soldiers with him. He found the east entrance unguarded, as if fate itself was conspiring to reunite him with Ilara. They entered silently, weapons drawn, moving through the mill's dusty interior with practiced stealth. He found them in the main weaving room, where massive looms sat like mechanical skeletons. Lysandra had Ilara backed against a support pillar, a knife pressed to her throat. Ilara's hands were free, but she stood frozen, the blade too close to risk movement. "One more step, Blackwood, and I cut her throat." Lysandra's voice was steady despite the chaos outside, despite the madness in her eyes. Dorian stopped, raising his hands slowly. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice emerged cold and controlled. "Lysandra, don't. She's innocent." "Innocent?" Lysandra laughed, high and broken. "She took everything from me." "I never noticed you," Dorian said, his words deliberately cruel, calculated to wound. "Not because of Ilara, because you're cruel, jealous, and small. Because even at 19, there was something rotten at your core." Lysandra flinched as if struck. "But Ilara," Dorian's voice softened, filled with wonder. "The moment I saw her in that square, defiant even in terror, I knew she was extraordinary. I caught that blade because I couldn't bear to see something so beautiful destroyed." He took a step forward, ignoring Lysandra's warning pressure on the knife. "I love her. I've never loved you, Lysandra. I never will." Lysandra's attention wavered, her focus shifting entirely to Dorian, to the confession she'd spent 7 years desperate to hear, even if it was about someone else. Ilara moved. She executed the defensive technique Dorian had drilled into her, ducking low and twisting away from the knife. The blade grazed her shoulder, cutting through fabric and skin, but she was free. Dorian lunged forward with inhuman speed, his hand closing around Lysandra's wrist. He twisted, applying pressure to the nerve cluster, and the knife clattered to the floor. Within seconds, he had her disarmed and restrained, his soldiers' training making the movements automatic. Marcus burst through the main entrance, soldiers pouring in behind him, surrounding the remaining mercenaries who threw down their weapons immediately. "It's over," Marcus announced. "Thomas has confessed to everything, how you orchestrated the false accusations, how you bribed him to betray the Duke, how you've been gathering evidence about the Ashford massacre to use for your own purposes." 2 men in official dress entered behind Marcus' royal magistrates, sent from the capital. They wore the king's seal on their coats, a stark contrast to the corrupt local magistrate who'd enabled so much suffering. "Lysandra Greaves," the senior magistrate intoned, "you are under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, attempted murder, and treason against noble houses of the realm." Lysandra screamed, thrashing against the soldiers who moved to restrain her. "This is injustice. She's the pretender. The Ashfords are traitors." "We have documents proving otherwise," the magistrate replied coldly, "including evidence that links your family directly to the Ashford massacre. You'll stand trial for your crimes." As they dragged her toward the door, Lysandra locked eyes with Ilara one final time. "You think you've won. The crown will never accept an Ashford heir. My family made sure of that." Her voice dropped to something venomous. "They buried your family once. They'll do it again." Ilara straightened, despite the pain in her shoulder, despite the exhaustion, despite everything. "Then I'll rise again, as many times as it takes." Lysandra's scream of fury echoed through the mill as they pulled her into the night. Suddenly, the mill was quiet except for the sounds of soldiers securing prisoners and checking for wounded. Marcus diplomatically ordered everyone outside, giving Dorian and Ilara space. Dorian turned to her, and his careful control shattered. His hands were shaking as he reached for her shoulder, examining the wound with frantic precision. "You're hurt. I've survived worse." Elara attempted humor, but her voice shook. Now that the immediate danger had passed, reaction was setting in. Her hands began to tremble, then her whole body. Dorian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I thought I'd lost you. I thought I was too late." Elara clung to him, her face pressed against his chest, feeling the hammering of his heart. "You came. I knew you would. Always," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "For the rest of my life, Elara. Always." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, cupping her face with both hands. "I need to say something, in case I never get another chance. Dorian, I love you." The words poured out like a dam breaking. "Not because you're an Ashford, not because of strategy or duty or revenge. I love you because you're brave and kind, and you make me want to be the man I used to be before betrayal hardened my heart." His thumbs traced her cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Because when I'm with you, I'm not the Dark Duke. I'm just Dorian, a man who's terrified of losing the best thing that's ever happened to him." "I love you too," Elara whispered, her hands fisting in his jacket. "Even when I didn't trust you, even when I was angry and hurt, I loved you." They kissed, deep and desperate, a promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. His hands were gentle despite the desperation, mindful of her wound, and hers were fierce, holding him like she'd never let go. When they finally broke apart, Marcus's tactful cough interrupted from the doorway. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption." He couldn't quite hide his smile. "But there's someone here who wishes to speak with Lady Elara." An elderly woman stepped forward from the shadows behind Marcus. Silver hair, pulled back in an elegant style despite the late hour and circumstances. Silver-grey eyes, identical to Elara's, set in a face lined with age, but still beautiful, still noble. Elara's breath caught. "Grandmother?" Lady Helena Ashford smiled through tears, her hands trembling as she reached toward her granddaughter. "Hello, child. You look so much like your mother." Elara moved forward on shaking legs, and Helena caught her, held her, and 2 decades of separation dissolved in an embrace that smelled of lavender and felt like coming home. "I've been watching over you," Helena whispered, "every day, waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready now," Elara said. "We're ready. It's time to reclaim what was stolen." Dorian stood back, watching the reunion with something warm and fierce in his chest. This love, family, justice, this was worth fighting for. This was worth everything. Chapter 9. Dawn of a New Era. The private sitting room at Blackwood Manor felt sacred in the morning light. Elara sat across from her grandmother, their hands clasped together on the small table between them, 20 years of separation bridged by touch and tears. Lady Helena Ashford was elegant even in her travelling clothes, her silver hair swept back to reveal a face that showed Elara exactly what she herself might look like in 40 years, still beautiful, still fierce, marked by sorrow but unbroken. "I need you to understand why I stayed away," Helena began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I was visiting my sister in the north when they came for us. By the time I received word of the attack, the estate was ashes and everyone was dead, or so they claimed." Her grip on Elara's hands tightened. "I searched for your mother for years, every lead, every whisper, every possible hiding place. I finally tracked her down to a small village, arrived just days before she died of pneumonia." Elara's breath caught. "You saw her? Before the end?" "She was so weak, but when she saw me, she smiled." Helena's voice broke. "She made me promise to stay hidden until you were old enough to claim your heritage safely. Don't let them know there are any Ashfords left," she said. "Let them think they've won. Wait until Elara is strong enough to fight." "So I've been gathering evidence," Helena continued, releasing one of Elara's hands to gesture to the leather case she'd brought. "Every document, every testimony, every piece of proof that the Ashfords were innocent and that the Thorns conspired to destroy us. I've been your shadow, child, protecting you from dangers you never knew existed." Dorian stood by the window, giving them space but present nonetheless. "That's why you couldn't intervene at the square. Revealing yourself would have exposed Elara before she was ready." "Precisely." Helena met his gaze with approval. "Though I'm grateful you were brave enough to do what I couldn't, Your Grace." From her case, Helena produced documents yellowed with age, some stained with what might have been blood, all carefully preserved. She spread them across the table with reverent care. These prove the Ashford treason was fabricated by Edmund Thorne and his co-conspirators. Here, financial records showing bribes paid to witnesses. Here, forged letters, supposedly written by your grandfather, proven false by analysis of the handwriting and paper. More documents followed. These show the Thornshire Duchy was illegally seized, the transfer of title pushed through within weeks of the massacre, and these, she touched a thick stack bound in ribbon, prove your lineage beyond any doubt. Birth records, baptismal certificates, testimony from those who knew Isolde and can verify you're her daughter. Ilara traced the signature on one document, her mother's handwriting, elegant and sure. This makes me the legitimate heir to everything they stole. Yes, Helena's expression was grave. But claiming it won't be easy, child. The Crown has built 20 years of lies on our graves. Powerful people have profited from those lies. They won't surrender without a fight. The weight of the choice settled on Ilara's shoulders like a physical thing. She could claim her heritage, enter the dangerous world of court politics, spend years fighting for justice. Or she could walk away, live quietly with Dorian, let the past stay buried and find peace in obscurity. Dorian crossed the room, settling beside her. He took her hand, his scarred palm pressed against hers. Whatever you choose, I'm with you. We'll face it together. Helena's eyes softened. I've carried this burden for 20 years. I'll understand if you choose peace, Ilara. You've already survived so much. Ilara was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. She thought of her mother, dying in poverty to protect her daughter. She thought of standing in the town square with an axe hovering above her head, condemned by lies no one questioned. She thought of Willem dropping that axe, of Peter risking everything to help her escape, of Jenny crying about her sick mother, of all the people trapped by systems that favored the powerful over the just. If I walk away, the Thorns keep their stolen power, she said finally. Others will suffer as I suffered. Others will face mobs and false accusations and justice denied. She looked at her grandmother, then at Dorian, her voice strengthening. My mother fought for justice. She died protecting that fight. I'll finish what she started, but I'll do it my way, Ilara continued, her chin lifting with that familiar defiance. Not just claiming titles and hoarding power like they did. I'll change the system that allowed this, create protections for the accused, establish due process, give voice to those who have none. Dorian's smile was fierce with pride. That's my Ilara. Several weeks later, the royal court assembled in unprecedented session. Word had spread of the Ashford heir's survival, and the gallery was packed with nobles, politicians, and common citizens, all craning for a glimpse of the woman who'd risen from the dead. Ilara entered the throne room in a gown she'd designed herself. Ashford blue silk embroidered with silver thread, but incorporating panels of simple cotton, the fabric of common people. The juxtaposition was deliberate, unmistakable. She walked alone down the long carpet toward the throne, her head high, her grandmother and Dorian watching from the gallery with hearts in their throats. At the foot of the dais, she curtsied with perfect court etiquette, another legacy her mother had left her, muscle memory of noble training preserved through years of hiding. Your Majesty, her voice rang clear through the silent hall, I stand before you as Lady Ilara Ashford, daughter of Lady Isolde Ashford and rightful heir to the Duchy of Thornshire. But I also stand before you as Ilara Whitmore, seamstress of Thornwick, falsely accused and nearly executed by mob justice. She presented Helena's evidence, her voice never wavering, as she laid out 20 years of conspiracy, murder, and theft. The court listened in stunned silence as truth dismantled carefully constructed lies. Edmund Thorne, forced to attend by royal summons, sat among the accused nobles. Years of guilt and alcohol had destroyed him. When pressed by the Crown's interrogator, he broke completely, his confession pouring out in a torrent of grief and self-loathing. We did it, he sobbed. All of it. The attack, the fabricated evidence, the seizure of lands. I've lived in torment ever since. Every drink was trying to forget, but I never could. Never. The King's judgment was swift. Lady Ilara Ashford, we recognize your claim and formally restore you as Duchess of Thornshire, with all rights, titles, and properties pertaining thereto. The court erupted in whispers, but the King raised his hand for silence. Furthermore, we order a full investigation into all parties involved in the Ashford massacre. Justice, though delayed, will be served. The political aftermath was seismic. The Thorn family was stripped of their lands and titles, their fortunes seized to provide restitution. Lord Pemberton and other co-conspirators faced trials that would drag on for months. The corrupt magistrate was removed from office and charged with accepting bribes and perverting justice. Geoffrey Thorn, freed from his family's toxic schemes, approached Ilara after the formal proceedings. He looked years older than his age, his face marked by shame. "Lady Ilara," he said quietly, "I was foolish and selfish. My infatuation with you was escapism from my father's house, and I allowed my weakness to be used against you. I hope someday you'll forgive me." Ilara studied him, this weak man who'd been one domino in a chain of suffering, and found she couldn't hate him. "I forgive you now, Geoffrey. We've all been pawns in someone else's game. The question is what we do with our freedom." She paused, then added gently, "Use yours well." As Duchess of Thornshire, Ilara threw herself into reform with the same passion she'd once brought to creating beautiful gowns. She established legal protections for the accused, ensuring no one could be punished without proper trial. She created due process requirements, dismantling the corrupt magistrate system that had enabled so much injustice. She used her wealth to support common workers, especially women, establishing a textile guild that taught seamstress skills and provided fair wages and safe working conditions. Within months, dozens of women who'd once lived in poverty were earning dignified livings. Dorian supported her fully, using his military connections to enforce the new laws and his political acumen to navigate the complex world of noble politics. They became a legendary partnership, his strategy and her compassion, his experience and her fresh perspective, his shadows and her light. One evening, 6 months after her formal recognition, Dorian led Ilara to the manor's small chapel. Ivy had been trimmed back, flowers planted, the space transformed into something beautiful rather than melancholy. "I've been the Dark Duke for so long," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I forgot what light felt like. I forgot that warmth existed, that hope was possible, that love was anything more than a weapon people used against you." He knelt on the chapel stones, pulling a ring from his pocket, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, the setting antique and exquisite. "Helena gave this to me. It was your mother's. She wanted you to have it." Tears already streaming down Ilara's face. "Dorian, will you marry me?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Not as strategy, not as political alliance, but because I love you. Because I want to spend every day watching you change the world and knowing I'm lucky enough to stand beside you." "Yes," Ilara laughed through her tears, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, as though it had always been meant for her. When they announced the engagement, Beatrice Thornwood cried such happy tears that she had to sit down. "I've waited so long to see both of you find happiness," she said, clasping their hands together. "You were both so wounded when you met. Now look at you, healed, whole, building something beautiful." She looked at Ilara with shining eyes. "I need to tell you something. I was there the night you were born, child. Your mother held you and said, 'She'll be stronger than me. She'll finish this.' And she was right. You've done more than finish it. You've transformed it into something she never imagined." The wedding was intimate, held in that same chapel where they'd shared their first kiss. Ilara wore a gown she'd created herself, incorporating fabric from her old seamstress dress into the design, a visible reminder of where she'd come from and who she'd become. "I honor my past," she told Helena as they prepared. "Even the painful parts. They made me who I am." Helena walked her down the short aisle, both women crying. Dorian waited at the altar, and the cold, distant Duke had vanished completely. In his place stood a man radiant with love, his eyes fixed on Ilara like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. His vows made half the assembly weep. "You caught my heart when I caught that blade. I've been yours ever since. You taught me that strength isn't about walls, but about having the courage to let them fall. I vow to be worthy of your love every day for the rest of our lives." Ilara's vows were equally powerful. "You showed me I could be more than my circumstances, more than what others said I was. You gave me the space to discover my own strength. Now, let's show the world what we can build together, a life of purpose, justice, and love." 6 months later, on a warm afternoon, Ilara insisted they return to the town square, where her nightmare had begun. A memorial stone now stood where the platform had been, carved by Willem's skilled hands. "For all those unjustly accused, may we learn to seek truth before passing judgment." Willem himself was there, now the town's master carpenter, respected and prosperous. Peter, the young mercenary who'd helped Elara escape, trained nearby under Captain Marcus's watchful eye, preparing for a life of honor rather than violence. The townspeople who'd once formed that angry mob now gathered to honor their duchess, many with tears of shame and gratitude. She'd shown them mercy when she could have demanded vengeance, had instead worked to ensure no one else would suffer as she had. Elara and Dorian stood hand in hand in the square at sunset, the memorial stone between them and the past. Elara's other hand rested on the small swell of her stomach, the evidence of new life growing within her. "Our daughter will grow up in a better world," she said softly. Dorian's eyebrows rose. "Daughter? You're certain?" "Intuition." Elara smiled up at him. "And if I'm right, we're naming her Isolde." He kissed her temple, his hand covering hers on her stomach. "Your mother would be so proud of you." "Our mothers," Elara corrected, thinking of Amelia braiding wildflowers. "All of them would be proud of us." A young girl, perhaps 5 years old, approached shyly. She held out a daisy, its white petals perfect in the golden light. "For you, Your Grace." Elara knelt carefully, accepting the flower with genuine warmth. "Thank you, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Lily," the girl whispered. "That's a beautiful name." Elara braided the daisy into her hair with practiced movements. "There, now we match." Lily giggled and ran back to her mother, who curtsied gratefully. Dorian smiled, watching his wife with wonder he'd long since stopped trying to hide. "You braid flowers like Amelia used to. Then I'm in good company." As they walked toward their carriage, the sunset painting the world in shades of gold and rose, Dorian asked, "Ready to go home?" Elara looked back at the square at the memorial, at the people who'd condemned her and now celebrated her, at the place where her old life had ended and her new one begun. Then she looked up at her husband, at the man who'd caught a blade in her heart in the same moment. "I am home," she said simply. "Wherever we are together, that's home." The Dark Duke was no longer dark, and the seamstress was no longer powerless. They had caught more than just a falling blade that day. In the square they had caught a future worth fighting for, a love worth believing in, a justice worth pursuing. And in the space between who they had been and who they had become, they found something rare and precious. Two broken people who had healed each other, and in doing so, had begun to heal a broken world. The axe never fell that day in the square. Instead, two lives rose together, unstoppable, free, built not on lies and power, but on truth, justice, and a love that had transformed them both. The crowd in the square watched them go, their duchess and her duke, and in the watching, they understood something profound. Redemption was possible, change was achievable, and sometimes the greatest strength came not from wielding power, but from having the courage to use it justly. The future stretched before them, bright with promise and purpose, and in a cradle that would soon be filled, a new generation waited to be born, one that would inherit not just titles and lands, but the legacy of two people who dared to believe the world could be better, who dared to make it so. And so ends the tale of Elara and Dorian, the seamstress who became a duchess, and the Dark Duke who learned to love again. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps this channel grow and allows me to bring you more epic historical romances like this one. And if you're new here, welcome to Lyra's Romance Stories, where every tale is a journey of love, courage, and second chances. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We have a beautiful community here of romance lovers, and I'd be honored to have you join us. I'd love to know, what was your favorite moment in Elara and Dorian's story? Was it when he caught the blade in the square, their first kiss in the chapel, or perhaps the final scene with the daisy? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. I read every single one, and your thoughts mean the world to me. If you're craving more passionate historical romance, check out the video I'm putting in the top right corner. I think you'll absolutely love it. It features another fierce heroine and a brooding hero who will steal your heart. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. Until our next story, remember, love is worth fighting for. Courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose to hope. This is Lyra, and I'll see you in the next tale.